Mason Parker opened his eyes to find a woman in his kitchen, wearing nothing but his faded college shirt. She stood at the stove, back turned, humming softly while scrambling eggs. The smell of coffee filled his cramped apartment. Morning light slanted through the window, illuminating her dark hair like a halo. When she turned around, holding a spatula, his breath caught. Beautiful didn't begin to cover it. She looked at him with eyes that held secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady as stone. "We need to talk about last night." What had he done? Before we continue, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Mason remained frozen on the edge of his worn couch. His mind scrambled backward through the fog of the previous evening, searching for answers in the blur. He remembered the hospital where he worked nights as an orderly, rain hammering the pavement, a woman in an expensive coat collapsing outside the emergency room entrance. Nothing beyond that lived in his memory. The stranger set 2 plates on his small dining table with practiced ease. She moved through his apartment like she'd memorized every corner, every creaking floorboard, every shadow. Her movements carried the grace of someone accustomed to being watched, to being judged. His shirt hung loose on her frame, ending mid-thigh, revealing legs that seemed to go on forever. She belonged in penthouses and corner offices, not his one-bedroom apartment in Queens, with its peeling paint and second-hand furniture. "I'm Skylar Nelson." The name detonated in his chest like a grenade. Everyone knew that name. Nelson Industries controlled half the commercial real estate in the city, billions in assets. He'd seen her face staring out from business magazines at the bodega, always unsmiling, always sharp as broken glass. Skylar sat across from him, folding her hands on the table like they were in a boardroom instead of his kitchen, with its chipped linoleum and flickering overhead light. Her nails were painted dark red, perfectly maintained, despite whatever chaos had brought her here. "You brought me here last night. I collapsed outside the hospital. You were leaving your shift." The memory surfaced slowly, reluctantly. The woman on the wet pavement, her coat soaked through, mascara running down her face like war paint. He'd called for help, stayed with her until she opened her eyes. She'd grabbed his wrist with surprising strength and whispered something that sounded like begging. No hospital, no police, just somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. He'd made the worst decision of his life and brought her home. "My daughter," Mason said, standing too quickly. The room tilted slightly. "Mia, she's still asleep in the next room. I need to get her ready for school." Skylar's expression shifted, softened in a way that made her look almost human. "I heard her earlier. 7 years old, right? I saw her drawings on the fridge. She's talented." He nodded, uncertain of everything except the need to keep Mia away from whatever storm Skylar Nelson carried with her. He moved toward the hallway, but Skylar's voice stopped him. "I'll be gone before she wakes. But first, you need to understand something." Mason waited. His pulse hammered against his ribs like fists on a door. The morning light made shadows dance across Skylar's face, and for a moment, she looked fragile, breakable. "Last night, I was running from people who want to destroy me. Not physically. Worse than that." She paused, and her fingers traced the rim of her coffee mug in slow circles. "They want to take everything I've built, everything my father died protecting. And you, Mason Parker, might be the only person in this entire city who helped me without calculating what you could gain." The words, heavy with implications he couldn't begin to untangle. But something in her voice, some note of genuine exhaustion, made him believe her. 3 days passed like any others. Mason dropped Mia at school, worked his shifts at the hospital. Came home exhausted to microwaved dinners and homework help. He told himself the encounter with Skylar Nelson had been some kind of fever dream, a story he'd laugh about someday, when life felt less heavy. Then Thursday morning arrived with the envelope. It waited on his doorstep like a snake coiled in morning shadow. Cream-colored paper, expensive. His name written in elegant script. Inside, a check that made his vision blur. $50,000. The number seemed obscene, impossible. More than he made in 2 years of night shifts and double overtime. A handwritten note accompanied it. For your kindness, use it well. N.S. Mason stood in his doorway, staring at the check until the numbers lost meaning. $50,000 could fix the leak in Mia's bedroom ceiling that grew worse every time it rained. Could buy her new shoes instead of the ones from the thrift store that pinched her toes. Could mean choosing groceries and electricity instead of one or the other. Could mean breathing, just for a moment, without the constant weight of almost drowning pressing on his chest. But something felt wrong about it. Wrong in a way he couldn't articulate, but felt in his bones. Like accepting payment for being human. Like putting a price on decency. He tucked the check into his desk drawer and tried to forget it existed. Tried to pretend his hands didn't shake when he thought about what it could mean for Mia's life. Friday brought something that made the check look like kindness. 2 men in dark suits appeared at the hospital during his shift. They moved through the corridors like sharks through water, smooth and predatory. They asked questions. Had he seen a woman matching Skylar's description? Had he helped anyone Monday night? Had anyone asked him to lie about anything? Mason said no to everything. The lies came easier than he expected, smooth as river stones in his mouth. The men exchanged glances that spoke volumes in a language he didn't want to learn. They left, but not before one of them placed a business card on the nurse's station desk with deliberate precision. Louis Miguel, Senior Investigator, Nelson Industries Internal Affairs. His stomach twisted itself into knots that would take days to untangle. Whatever Skylar Nelson was running from had followed her straight to his doorstep, and now his name was written in someone's file, attached to questions he didn't know how to answer. That night, he found Mia sitting at the kitchen table, homework forgotten. Staring out the window at something only she could see. She'd been quiet lately, more than usual. Ever since her mother walked out 2 years ago, Mia had learned to make herself small, to not ask for things, to be easy. Are we poor? The question landed like a punch to his solar plexus. Mason knelt beside her chair, trying to find words that wouldn't be lies, but wouldn't hurt her either. What makes you ask that, sweetheart? Jenny at school said her mom said we're probably poor because you work at the hospital, but you're not a doctor or a nurse or anything important. The words cut deeper than they should have. He thought about the check in his drawer, about Skylar's note, about the men in suits asking questions. He thought about all the ways people measured worth and found him wanting. We have everything we need. We have each other. Mia finally looked at him, and her eyes held understanding far beyond her 7 years. But do we have enough? He didn't know how to answer that honestly, not without breaking something inside both of them. Later, after Mia fell asleep clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, the one she'd had since birth, that was now more patches than original fabric, Mason sat alone in the dark living room. He pulled out the check again. The paper felt too fine between his calloused fingers, too delicate for hands that scrubbed floors and emptied bedpans. He thought about Skylar's words, the only person who helped me without wanting something in return. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe he should want things. Maybe wanting a better life for his daughter wasn't greed, but survival. His phone buzzed, shattering the silence. Unknown number. He almost sent it to voicemail. Mason Parker, this is Catherine Ross. I'm Skylar Nelson's attorney. We need to meet. Tomorrow. It's urgent. The line went dead before he could respond. The law office occupied the 40th floor of a building Mason had only ever seen from street level, a tower of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky itself. Inside, everything whispered wealth, art on the walls that looked important, a view that transformed the city into something beautiful instead of crushing. Catherine Ross was 50-something, sharp-eyed, wearing a suit that could have paid his rent for 6 months. She didn't waste time on pleasantries or small talk. She slid a folder across the polished conference table like dealing cards in a high-stakes game. Skylar Nelson is in trouble. Unfortunately, so are you. Mason opened the folder. Photographs spilled out like accusations. Him walking into his building Monday night, Skylar leaning heavily on his shoulder, him leaving for work Tuesday morning, exhaustion written across his face. Mia on the sidewalk. Wednesday, backpack too big for her small frame, looking exactly like what she was, a kid trying to be brave in a world that didn't care. Who took these? People who want to prove Skylar is unstable. Her uncle, Dylan Nelson, is staging a corporate coup. He's building a case that Skylar is unfit to run Nelson Industries. Mental breakdown, erratic behavior, spending nights in questionable locations with questionable people. No offense. None taken. I am questionable. Mason's voice came out flatter than he intended. What does this have to do with me? Catherine leaned forward, and her expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy if lawyers allowed themselves such luxuries. Dylan is calling an emergency board meeting in 2 weeks. If he succeeds in removing Skylar from power, Nelson Industries will be dismantled and sold for parts. 4,000 employees will lose their jobs. Skylar will lose everything her father built. Again. What does this have to do with me? Skylar wants to hire you as her executive assistant. Mason laughed. The sound echoed wrong in the expensive room, harsh and bitter. That's insane. I've seen crazier things work. Catherine pulled out another document, this one thick with legal language and numbers that made his head spin. She needs someone she can trust, someone who isn't tangled up in company politics. Someone who helped her when she had nothing to offer in return. Someone who proves her judgment isn't compromised. And if I say no, then Dylan uses those photographs to paint a different story. Reckless CEO consorting with random men, putting herself in dangerous situations, making terrible decisions. The board will vote her out without hesitation. Mason stood, walked to the window. The city sprawled below like a circuit board, millions of people fighting battles he'd never know about. He thought about Mia's question echoing in his head like a song he couldn't stop humming. Are we poor? Do we have enough? What would I actually have to do? Show up, be professional, attend the board meeting, let them see that Skylar's instincts about people are still sound, that she didn't make a catastrophic mistake that night. Catherine paused, and her voice dropped. The job pays $200,000 a year, full benefits, private school tuition for Mia included. The number hit him like lightning. $200,000. He could give Mia everything. Dance lessons like she'd begged for before learning to stop asking. New clothes that fit properly. A childhood that didn't taste like constant apology. But something felt wrong, like fruit hanging too low on poisoned branches. I need time to think. You have until Monday. But Mason? Catherine stood, meeting his eyes with unusual directness. Skylar doesn't ask for help, ever. She'd rather drown than admit she can't swim. The fact that she's asking now should tell you exactly how desperate things are. That weekend, Mason barely slept. He researched Skylar Nelson until his eyes burned and the screen swam. Youngest CEO in Nelson Industries history, appointed at 28 after her father's massive heart attack. She'd tripled the company's value in 5 years, earned reputations as both brilliant and ruthless. But other stories lurked beneath the success. Whispers of panic attacks during presentations. A breakdown during a board meeting 3 years ago that resulted in a month-long absence, explained away as a business trip to Singapore. Long stretches where she disappeared from public view entirely. The media called her a genius, burning too bright. a woman destined to flame out spectacularly. Sunday night, Mia crawled into his lap while he sat staring at his laptop. "You look sad." "Just tired." She studied his face with the seriousness only children possess, the weight of seeing too much too young written in her eyes. "Is it about the pretty lady? The one in the picture?" His heart stopped beating. "What picture?" "On your desk. I saw it when I was looking for tape. She's really pretty. Like a princess in a movie." He'd been careless, left one of Catherine's photographs visible where curious 7-year-old eyes could find it. "Mia, that's not—" "It's okay." She cut him off quickly, her small hand patting his arm. "I know Mom's not coming back. If you like someone, I want you to be happy." Mason held her tighter, felt something crack in his chest. 7 years old, and already trying to give him permission to live, already trying to be easy, to not be a burden. I don't like her that way, but she offered me a job, a really good job. It would mean we could have more things, better things. But it would also mean spending a lot of time away from home. Mia was quiet for so long, he thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she said, "Would it make you happy?" The question gutted him. "I don't know." "Then maybe you should find out. That's what you always tell me. Try new things. See what happens." Monday morning, Mason called Catherine Ross before he could change his mind, before fear could wrap its fingers around his throat and choke the words back down. "I'll take the job." Nelson Industries headquarters occupied an entire city block in Midtown Manhattan. Mason had passed it thousands of times, without imagining he'd ever walk through those revolving doors as anything other than part of the invisible crowd. Now he sat in a conference room on the 52nd floor, wearing a suit Catherine had bought him that fit better than anything he'd ever owned. Skylar sat at the head of the long table, perfectly composed in a charcoal gray suit, dark hair pulled back so tight it must have hurt. She hadn't looked at him once since he arrived. The board members filed in like a funeral procession, 12 men and women carved from marble and old money, faces that revealed nothing. Dylan Nelson entered last, tall and silver-haired, smiling like a man holding all the cards and enjoying the game. "Shall we begin?" He didn't wait for answers. "I've called this emergency meeting to address serious concerns about Skylar's fitness to lead this company." What followed was surgical in its brutality. Dylan presented evidence like a prosecutor building an airtight case. Financial decisions questioned and reframed as reckless. Partnerships criticized as desperate. And then, the photographs. Skylar outside the hospital looking lost. Skylar in Mason's apartment building in the early morning. Skylar's car found abandoned in Queens, like evidence at a crime scene. "She's unraveling," Dylan said, his voice heavy with false concern that everyone pretended to believe. "Just like 3 years ago, just like her father before her. We cannot afford another breakdown. The company won't survive it this time." Skylar's face remained expressionless, but Mason saw her hands grip the armrest until her knuckles went white. Dylan turned his attention to Mason, like a spotlight swinging toward new prey. "Mr. Parker, you're here as Skylar's new executive assistant?" "Yes. How exactly did you meet my niece?" Mason had rehearsed this with Catherine, until the words felt like lines, in a play he hadn't auditioned for. But sitting under Dylan's cold gaze felt different than practice sessions. "She collapsed outside the hospital where I work. I helped her." "Helped her how?" "Stayed with her, made sure she was safe." "And then you took her to your apartment?" The room shifted. Every eye turned toward him. Mason felt the weight of their judgment, their assumptions, their willingness to believe the worst. "She asked me to. She didn't want to go to the hospital." "How convenient." Dylan's smile could have cut glass. "And now she's employed you, given you a 6-figure position you're grotesquely unqualified for. Tell me, Mr. Parker, what exactly are your credentials for being an executive assistant at a billion-dollar company?" I don't have any. No business degree? No prior corporate experience? No. So Skylar hired you based purely on an emotional connection formed during what appears to be a mental health crisis. Does that sound like sound judgment to everyone here? Mason felt the trap closing around his throat. Everything he said made it worse. Catherine had warned him this would happen, that Dylan was too skilled, too prepared, too hungry for this moment. Then Skylar spoke, her voice cut through the room like a blade finding flesh. He's honest. The board members turned to her in unison. Dylan's smile flickered. You want to know why I hired him? Because Mason Parker is the first person in 5 years who didn't want something from me. When I collapsed, he didn't see an opportunity. He didn't see a networking chance or a story to sell to the highest bidder. He saw a human being who needed help. She paused, and her voice grew stronger. That's a quality I can't teach. That's judgment I can trust. Dylan recovered quickly, smoothly. Skylar, with all due respect, one act of kindness doesn't qualify someone to— I'm not finished. Her voice turned to ice. You want to discuss my judgment? Let's discuss judgment. 3 months ago, you pushed hard for the Riverside development deal. I blocked it. Remember why? Dylan's face darkened like storm clouds gathering. That's not relevant. The environmental reports were falsified. The soil was contaminated with industrial waste that would have cost us hundreds of millions in cleanup and lawsuits. If we'd built on that land, Nelson Industries would be facing bankruptcy. I caught it because I read every page of every report. Because my judgment, even on my worst days, remains better than yours on your best. The room went silent. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their chair. The air felt thick enough to choke on. Skylar turned to address the full board, her posture straight as steel. I'm not perfect. I've struggled with anxiety and depression. I've had panic attacks in bathroom stalls and cried in my office after everyone went home. But I have never, not once, put this company at risk. And hiring Mason Parker isn't a sign of weakness. It's proof that I still know how to recognize character when I see it. For a moment, Mason thought she'd won. For a moment, victory seemed possible. Then Dylan played his final card. Tell them about your father. Skylar. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Skylar went pale, all the color draining from her face like water down a sink. Don't. Tell them how he really died. The silence that followed felt alive, malevolent. Mason watched something break behind Skylar's eyes, watched her armor crack and fall away. This was something deeper than corporate politics, darker than boardroom battles. Skylar's voice came out barely above a whisper. He had a heart attack. No. Dylan pulled out a document with the reverence of someone revealing a holy relic. He killed himself. The words detonated in the silence. Board members gasped. Someone dropped a pen. The sound echoed like breaking bones. Dylan slid the document across the table. The sealed medical examiner's report ruled a heart attack publicly to protect the company's stock price. But the autopsy shows pills, alcohol, a deliberate overdose. He couldn't handle the pressure anymore, Skylar, and neither can you. You're following the exact same path, making the same mistakes, heading toward the same ending. Mason watched Skylar's face, saw something fundamental break behind her carefully constructed mask. She looked smaller suddenly, younger, like a child caught in a lie too big to outrun. Then she looked directly at Mason. Their eyes met across the polished table, and he saw the question she couldn't ask aloud. Will you run too? Will you abandon me like everyone else? He thought about Mia's question echoing through his head. Are we poor? He thought about the uncashed check still sitting in his desk drawer. He thought about Skylar in his kitchen that morning, humming while making eggs, trying desperately to feel normal for just one moment. Mason stood. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the suffocating silence. I'd like to say something. Catherine grabbed his arm in warning, but he kept going, pushed forward by something he couldn't name but felt in his bones. I don't know anything about business. I don't know about quarterly reports or stock prices or whatever else happens in rooms like this. But I know people. His voice gained strength as he spoke. I've spent 10 years working in a hospital emergency room, watching people at their absolute worst. I've seen who breaks completely and who bends but doesn't shatter. I've seen people who confuse cruelty with strength and people who mistake kindness for weakness. He looked directly at Dylan. Skylar didn't hire me because she's weak or unstable or making poor decisions. She hired me because she's smart enough to know that sometimes the best judge of character is someone who has absolutely nothing to gain from lying. Dylan's face hardened into something ugly. Mr. Parker, she didn't tell me about her father. She didn't tell me about any of this corporate drama. She just asked me to show up and be honest. That's all she wanted. That's all she's ever wanted from anyone. Mason turned to face the full board. And if you can't see that someone asking for simple honesty in a world full of people playing games is a sign of strength, not weakness, then maybe you're the ones whose judgment should be questioned. The silence that followed felt different now, charged, uncertain. Skylar spoke again, and her voice was steady, strong, unbreakable. My father taught me that leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest when you fail and having the courage to try again. I've failed. I've struggled. I've spent nights crying in my car in parking garages because I couldn't let anyone see me break. She paused. But I've never stopped trying. And I won't start now. She pulled out her own folder, movements precise and controlled. These are the quarterly reports Dylan tried to bury in the back of your briefing packets. Nelson Industries just posted the highest profits in company history. 4,000 employees with secure jobs and full benefits. 3 new developments, breaking ground next quarter. $200 million in charitable contributions to city infrastructure. She looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. That's not the work of someone unfit to lead. That's the work of someone who refuses to quit, even when quitting would be easier. She finally looked at Dylan, and her expression held something that might have been pity. You can question my mental health. You can question my judgment. You can drag my father's memory through the mud to serve your own ambitions. But you cannot question my results. And you cannot question whether I care about this company and everyone who depends on it more than anyone else in this room. The vote came 20 minutes later, after board members whispered among themselves like conspirators. 8-4 in Skylar's favor. Dylan Nelson left without a word, his face carved from rage and thwarted ambition. But for Mason, the real plot twist came 3 hours later in Skylar's office, when she finally told him the truth. Skylar poured 2 glasses of whiskey, with hands that shook slightly. Mason noticed the bottle was expensive, the kind people received as gifts and never opened because they were too beautiful to use. She'd opened it. Thank you. She handed him a glass, and their fingers brushed. For what you said in there. Mason sipped. The alcohol burned his throat in a way that felt cleansing. I meant it. I know. That's what made it work. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, the city sprawling below like a living map. I need to tell you something about that night we met. He waited, glass heavy in his hand. I didn't collapse by accident. The words came out flat, emotionless. I was standing outside that hospital for 3 hours, watching the entrance, waiting. Mason's chest tightened. Waiting for what? Skylar turned to face him, and her expression was raw, stripped of every defense mechanism he'd seen her use. For someone like you. For someone who would help without asking questions. Someone with a daughter. Someone drowning in medical debt. Someone who needed money badly enough to eventually say yes to an insane proposition. The words hit him like physical blows. The room tilted. His vision narrowed to Skylar's face, to the tears she was fighting to hold back. "What are you saying?" "Dylan was right about my father." Her voice cracked but didn't break. "He did kill himself, but not because he was weak or couldn't handle pressure. Because Dylan was blackmailing him, threatening to expose financial mistakes my father made 20 years ago. Mistakes that would have destroyed the company and everyone who depended on it for their livelihoods. So my father made a choice. He made it look like natural causes to protect Nelson Industries and 4,000 families." She paused, and a tear finally escaped, tracking down her cheek. "I inherited that protection. And Dylan's threats." Mason stood slowly, his mind racing through every conversation, every moment, every decision since Monday night. "So all of this, hiring me, the board meeting, everything was planned, calculated, orchestrated." Skylar's shoulders sagged. "I needed someone genuine, someone the board would believe, someone Dylan couldn't buy or intimidate because they didn't know enough to be corrupted. I researched you, Mason. Single father, struggling with medical debt. Good man according to everyone at the hospital who would talk to my investigator. Perfect for what I needed." The room spun. Mason thought he might vomit. "You used me." "Yes. You used my daughter, put her photo in a file, investigated her medical history, calculated exactly how desperate I was." "Yes." The word came out broken, barely audible. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than I know how to express. But I was drowning, and you were a life raft, and I grabbed on without thinking about what it would cost you." Mason walked toward the door. His hand touched the cold metal handle before she spoke again. "I know you hate me right now. You should. I used you, manipulated you, treated you and your daughter like chess pieces in a game you didn't know you were playing. It was wrong. All of it." She took a shaking breath. "But I need you to know something. What I said in that boardroom about you being honest, about recognizing character, that was completely true. I was looking for someone to use, but I found something I didn't expect and didn't know I needed." "What?" "A friend. Maybe the first real friend I've had since my father died." Mason laughed, bitter and harsh. Friends don't lie to each other. Friends don't manipulate each other's desperation. "You're absolutely right." Skylar crossed the room, stopping a few feet from him. "So I'm telling you the truth now. All of it. No more games, no more manipulation." She pulled out another document. "And I'm giving you a choice." "What choice?" "The job offer is real. 200,000, full benefits, private school for Mia. Everything Catherine promised. You can walk out that door right now, and I'll still pay you for the entire year. Consider it payment for what I put you through, or—" She hesitated, and vulnerability flooded her face. "Or you can stay, actually work as my assistant, help me rebuild this company the right way, with honesty instead of manipulation. Help me prove that my father didn't die for nothing." Mason stared at her, searching for lies and finding only exhaustion. "Why would I do that?" "Because despite everything, you're still standing here listening instead of walking away. Because you're curious about what comes next. Because maybe you see something in me worth saving, something worth believing in." She paused. "And because I can pay off your daughter's medical bills, all of them, today." The world stopped spinning. Time froze. "What medical bills?" His voice came out hoarse, strangled. Skylar's expression softened into something achingly genuine. "The ones from 2 years ago, when your wife left and Mia needed emergency surgery. You're still making payments, still choosing between groceries and electricity because of them." She held out the document. "I can make them disappear. All $147,000. Not as payment for services rendered. as an apology for dragging you into my nightmare. Mason felt his knees weaken. The medical bills, the crushing weight he carried every single day, the reason he worked double shifts, and Mia wore secondhand shoes, and they ate pasta 6 nights a week. Gone. Erased. Like they'd never existed. How do you know the exact amount? I told you. I researched you thoroughly before that night. Skylar's voice cracked again. And what I found was a man doing everything right and still drowning. A man who deserved so much better than what life gave him. A man I was about to use anyway, because I was desperate and scared and out of options. Tears fell freely now, and she didn't wipe them away. I'm not a good person, Mason. I'm ruthless and calculating, and I make terrible choices when fear takes over. But I'm trying to be better. I think maybe you could help me figure out how. The silence stretched between them like a bridge, waiting to be crossed or burned. Mason thought about Mia, about dance lessons and new shoes and a bedroom ceiling that didn't leak. He thought about Skylar in his kitchen, making eggs, humming, trying so hard to feel normal. He thought about her face in the boardroom when Dylan mentioned her father, the way she'd looked at Mason like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. She'd used him, manipulated him, played him like an instrument. But she'd also told him the truth when she didn't have to. She'd given him a choice when she could have just kept lying and stringing him along. I need time to think about it. Skylar nodded, relief washing over her face. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless of your decision. Mason picked Mia up from dance class on a Tuesday afternoon. She ran to the car in her pink leotard, grinning wide, hair wild from practice. She'd made friends, real friends who invited her to birthday parties and sleepovers. She was laughing again, loud and unself-conscious. She looked like a kid who didn't carry the world on her small shoulders. "Did you see my pirouette?" Mia asked, buckling herself in. "I saw. You're getting really good, sweetheart. Miss Catherine says I have natural grace." She paused, fiddling with her seatbelt. "Is Miss Skylar coming for dinner again tonight?" Mason glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Probably." "Why?" "I like when she comes over. She's funny when she tells stories about work, and she always does the dishes, even though you tell her she doesn't have to." He smiled despite himself. Skylar had been coming for dinner every Sunday for 2 months now. At first, it had been awkward and forced, 2 people trying to navigate friendship built on lies. But slowly, something real had grown in the spaces between words. They'd stopped talking about work and started talking about everything else. Books they'd loved as children, movies that made them cry, embarrassing stories from their teenage years. Skylar taught Mia how to play chess with a seriousness that made his daughter glow. Mia taught Skylar how to make friendship bracelets, and now the CEO of a billion-dollar company wore cheap-colored thread around her wrist to every board meeting. Last week, Mason had walked into the kitchen to find them both laughing at something on Mia's tablet. Skylar's expensive suit jacket draped carelessly over a chair, her perfect hair falling out of its controlled bun. She'd looked happy, real, human. "Are you and Miss Skylar dating?" His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "No, sweetheart. We're just friends." "But you like her." "I can tell." 7-year-old saw things adults tried desperately to hide. "Yeah, I like her." "Good. She needs friends. She seems really lonely sometimes, even when she's smiling." That night, after Mia fell asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, Mason and Skylar sat on his small balcony sharing a bottle of wine. The city hummed below them, endless and alive with possibility. "Dylan's trying again," Skylar said quietly. "Different tactics this time. More patient. He's learning." "Are you worried?" "Always." She sipped her wine. "But less than before. Having someone I can trust helps more than I can explain." Mason looked at her. 3 months ago, he'd thought she was untouchable, a woman made of ice, and sharp edges, and ruthless ambition. Now he saw the cracks, the places where she'd been broken and glued back together with sheer willpower. He saw someone fighting desperately to be good in a world that rewarded being ruthless. "Can I ask you something? Anything. That morning, in my kitchen, when you were making eggs, were you scared?" Skylar was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers traced patterns on her wineglass. "Terrified. I'd just spent the night in a stranger's apartment, running from people who wanted to destroy me. I didn't know if you'd call the police or sell your story to the press or just kick me out onto the street." She met his eyes. "But you didn't. You just sat there looking confused and decent and completely out of your depth. And I thought maybe the world isn't entirely full of wolves. Maybe there are still a few people who help because it's the right thing to do. And then you used me anyway. And then I used you anyway." She agreed without flinching. "Because I'm still learning how to trust the good things. Still learning that not everyone who offers help wants something back. Still learning that kindness can exist without hidden prices attached." She reached over and took his hand. "Thank you for staying, for giving me a chance to learn." Her hand felt warm in his, smaller than he expected, more fragile. He thought about all the ways this could still fall apart. The power imbalance, the secret still buried, the fact that their entire relationship started with calculated manipulation. But he also thought about Mia learning to dance without fear of the cost. About Skylar laughing at friendship bracelets like they were diamonds. About second chances and choosing to believe people could change when given reason to. "For what it's worth, I think you're learning fast." Skylar smiled, and it reached her eyes this time, genuine and unguarded and beautiful. "For what it's worth, I think hiring you was the first good decision I made in years, even if I made it for all the wrong reasons." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights blur into constellations. Somewhere far below, people were fighting their own impossible battles, making their own desperate choices. But up here, in the quiet space between past and future, two broken people held hands and wondered if maybe they could build something true from fragments of lies. Because sometimes, the best things start in the worst ways. Sometimes trust grows from betrayal's ashes. Sometimes, the person who uses you becomes the person who saves you. And sometimes, waking up to find a stranger in your kitchen wearing your shirt is exactly the plot twist your life needed all along. If this story touched something in you, hit that like button and share it with someone you want to hear with. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story.